What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. I hope you liked the first video of me rambling for 8 minutes. I hope you like this video as well. Now, before I get into it, this is going to be a story, like I said, on the car crash that claimed the life of James Dean and the story surrounding that. Now, before I get into the story, let me know if you guys like this way of filming, because I'm still brand new to YouTube and filming all of this. So let me know if you like this vertical way of filming better, or if you like the other way of filming better. Let me know in the comments down below if you like that, or let me know, because I'm learning as I'm filming these videos. So just let me know what you guys like, let me know what you guys enjoy, so I can help bring you more content that you want to see. Now, as I said, this video is about the car crash that claimed the life of James Dean, and it's a super interesting situation of what happened. It's tragic, obviously, because it claimed the life of a young man who was 4 years younger than I am at the time of filming this, because I'm 28 right now, and he was 24 when he died, which is just tragic. Now, I do have notes right here, so I want to make sure I get all the details right in a story like this, because I think it's important when you're telling stories, not just to be first, but to be accurate with your information, no matter what your topic is. So if there's anything I'm unsure of, I will glance down to make sure that I have information correct. Because I think, like I just said, it is important to get your information correct. Now, the car crash happened on September 30th of 1955. Now, this is a long time before I was born. It was decades before my parents was born. So this was a while ago. Contrary to popular belief, the popular belief was James Dean liked to be reckless with his speed, and he wasn't. He did enjoy racing, and studio execs didn't like that. So I think that's where it partially comes from. Studio execs telling him he shouldn't race, but he understood the difference between enjoying speed and doing it recklessly, because shortly before he died, he did a PSA about not being, reckless on the highways. You can look that up here on YouTube or anywhere else that has a video and watch that. I think he was smart, but he understood, when you should go fast and when you shouldn't. So the first stop that day was the Hollywood Ranch Market on Vine Street, and they left around 1:15, and the story says they had like coffee and donuts. So I can just picture them with this car sitting outside talking about, the race they were headed to that day, because they were headed to a race down in Salinas, and he was driving the car because he had literally just purchased the car, and they wanted him to get more seat time behind the wheel before they drove it in the race, so he could get used to the car and things of that nature. Now, the next stop is where that famous last photo of James Dean comes from. They stopped at a Mobile station on Ventura Boulevard in Sherman Oaks around 2. So they got gas, maybe got a drink or whatever the heck else they were doing. And then some people actually don't know this next part, which is actually super interesting. Adds another detail to the story. An hour and a half later at 3:30, James Dean and the guys that were following him, because they actually had his photographer and someone else that was going to do a story on James Dean at this race, pulling the trailer that was for the car that was behind them. They got pulled over by California Highway Patrolman Ollie Hunter for going 65 and a 55. And then the Ford County Squire with the trailer was ticketed for going 20 miles an hour, because at the time, the speed limit for vehicles towing a trailer was 55, which I thought was an odd sort of thing. I don't know if it's this way now, because I don't have a trailer to tow, so I just probably don't have to know that rule. But let me know if that's actually still a rule out in California or anywhere in general. I just thought that was odd that that was a rule. Now, the patrolman later said he didn't know who James Dean was, which is entirely possible, because James Dean wasn't a big star yet. He became more of a star and an icon after his death, because he had done some bit parts, and he had done 3 movies, but only one of those movies had been released at the time of his death. So it is entirely possible that this patrol officer just didn't know who he was. Just another guy. He was in a nice flashy car, and telling him to slow down, or you'll end up hurting yourself. So that's just another interesting tidbit, that the officer pulls him over, doesn't know who he is, just tells him, slow down, kid, sort of thing. And then next stop, they go to Blackwell's Corner, where he meets 2 other drivers from the race, but they probably got there a little after 5, and they planned to have dinner that night in Paso Robles. He only stayed for a few minutes, and he left around 5:15. Rolf, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name. His mechanic, who was in his passenger seat, later testified that they then went through Bakersfield, because there was a little controversy on whether or not they went through Bakersfield, they went around Bakersfield. But Rolf later testified at the Inquisition for the crash that they went right through Bakersfield and on U.S. Route 466. And then about half an hour later at 5:54, a two-tone black and white 1954 Tudor, which is just a massive car. It's just so much bigger than their car. It was he was headed east on Route 466, just west of the junction near Shandon. Its driver, Donald Turnipseed, was a Navy vet and a college student at Cal Poly. So he goes to make a left-hand turn. He crosses over the center line into their lane. James notices that this guy isn't stopping for them, isn't slowing down, isn't looking where he's going, and while making this turn. And then James tries to perform a racing maneuver, which they call the sidestepping, but with insufficient time and space, it was almost a head-on collision. And this was a rough collision. This was with a car as big as Donald's car was. It was so much heavier than the car James Dean was driving that Donald only ended up sustaining minor injuries. Rolf, the guy that was in James's car with him, had some pretty serious injuries, but he lived as well. James is the only one that ends up dying here, and he doesn't die instantly, which is just sad. Because honestly, if you're in a car crash and with the injuries that he sustained, which I'll go over in a second, you almost hope that those guys pass away instantly, so they don't have to feel that sort of pain. Because this was just an accident, but I'll get into some of that stuff in a second. But Dean's cause of death was eventually listed by the coroner as a broken neck. He was eventually pronounced dead when they got to the hospital at about 6:20, so that was just a few minutes, probably only a few minutes after he got to the hospital. He had fractured both parts of his jaw. He had broken bones all over his body and in all of his limbs. Now, there was some controversy in some years since the crash, on who was driving the car, but that was put to rest pretty easily, because when the first responders got there, James was in the driver's seat. He was trapped in the driver's seat, and they had to use a crowbar, to get him out of the driver's seat because his foot was trapped, so he couldn't move. So there was no way Rolf was driving this car, because James was in the driver's seat when the first responders and the people that witnessed the crash came to the aid of the crash site, with the aid of the people at the crash site. Now, speaking of the witnesses, there was reportedly 3 different witnesses that saw this crash. One was a nursing student whose name I couldn't find, who said that when she went to go render aid to James, that he still had he still had a pulse. So when she got there after the crash, I don't know if she was just, they were just hanging out, if they were just driving past or whatever the deal was, but she saw the crash or saw the aftermath of the crash, and as a nursing student, she went to help these crash victims, and then James still had a pulse. And then he also still had a pulse when he initially arrived at the hospital, because they didn't declare him dead instantly. They didn't immediately, do whatever sort of initial assessment they would do on a person, because I'm not a medical professional. When declare him dead, they probably declared him dead maybe 10 minutes after he got there. I'm just kind of guesstimating based on the time of the crash and the time that, everything kind of occurred on. Now, there was another guy whose name I don't remember. I forgot to write it down, who said that he witnessed the car, James's car rather, do like 2 or 3 cartwheels after the crash, and then end up where it ended up, because it ended up in the gully, essentially, on the other side of a road next to like a barbed wire fence. And you can look up photos of the crash site and the position the car was in and everything like that. James's car was wrecked. Donald's car only sustained minor injuries, because minor damage, excuse me. He was the one that sustained minor injuries because his car was just so much heavier than the car that hit them, that his car only ended up getting pushed like 40 feet down the road. So that's essentially the story of the crash and the things that ended up. Like I said, the coroner ended up listing his cause of death as a broken neck, because there was some controversy on whether or not he sorry, because I'm filming outside, whether or not he died instantly. But there is no corroboration to the story that he may have died instantly. He didn't die instantly. He survived, had plenty of injuries. He was probably in tremendous pain, and then ends up dying 15-20 minutes at most after this crash, which is just awful to think about. The pain that he must have been in, the pain that Rolf must have been in, who also had to have some surgeries, and he ended up living, obviously, because James was the only one that ended up dying in this crash. But he had to have been in tremendous pain. But it was just a life cut short. And in my opinion, this accident is more Donald's fault than James's fault. Now, I'm not blaming Donald for this, because it was just an accident. Because Donald later testified that he didn't see the car. I don't think he saw the car, because I don't think he was looking. I think he just made the turn like plenty of us drive all the time. We're not always paying attention every second we're driving. He makes the turn, doesn't see the car, collision. James Dean ends up dying. I'm not saying there was any malicious intent on Donald's part, because there wasn't. But I truly think that this accident was more his fault than James's fault, because James was only going about 55, 60. There were some later reports that he was going like 85, but CHP, California Highway Patrol, testified essentially that he was only going about 55, 60 when they responded to the crash. And when you got one car that's a lot heavier than the other car, that can happen. When one thing that's a lot smaller hits something that's a lot bigger, that thing that's a lot smaller and lighter can take a hell of a lot of damage. So that's essentially the story. I think it was a tragic accident that didn't need to happen, but it ended up happening, and ended up claiming the life of a young man that was in the prime of his life. This 24-year-old kid who was just breaking into the movie industry. He had done some roles, in the prime of his life, headed to this race down in Salinas because he loved racing cars, and it was just a life cut short. Now, getting into some of the other things after in the years since about the cursed car. I think the curse ended up starting because there was an actor, Kirk Douglas, I think his name was, who the week before the crash kind of wrote in his diary that he was afraid of this car, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing. He was afraid of this car, and he was essentially, he warned James not to get in it because he'd be dead this time next week, supposedly. And James just kind of laughs him off like he was being silly, and because it was a beautiful car, but it was also obviously didn't have a top. And I've run into people myself that just are afraid to get into cars without roofs. It's a thing that people do, and it's a fear that people have. It's a phobia that people have. And then the curse kind of starts the next year, because after the crash, they stripped the car for parts, like a lot of cars end up getting stripped after crashes. And then there was a driver in that same race that they were headed to the next year that had some parts off of James's car, who ends up crashing into a tree and dying with parts off of James's car. Now, that's really the start of the cursed car story, because got parts off of a car that crashed, that killed the driver, and then you end up dying with parts from that cursed car. Now, there were some other stories in the decades since, because they tried to turn this car into a tourist attraction, like they did with the Bonnie and Clyde death car, which is the car that Bonnie and Clyde ended up getting shot and killed in when they were ambushed by Frank Hammer and those guys back in the 30s. But there were some stories that the tires popped, the car caught on fire, but nothing else around it got damaged. But those stories just don't have any evidence to that fact. You know, there's no evidence that these tires popped because it was just a story. Not that I found, at least. There's also no evidence. There's also no evidence to the fact that that this car spontaneously combusted but didn't damage anything else around it. And then I think it was like 2005-ish. I might be a little off on the year. The car just goes missing. No one supposedly knows where the heck this car went. You know, no one knows where it was. I don't remember where it was going, but it just supposedly disappeared. And to this day, no one knows where this car is. You know, no one supposedly knows what happened to this car, which, you know, I think is a bit fishy, but that's just my opinion. I just think they're trying to build hype around this car, because once they eventually find it, they can be like, oh, we found the cursed James Dean car, come see it now at such and such an address. But I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to these types of things, so that's just my opinion. But yeah, you know, that's the story of the brief story of the crash that killed James Dean, and, you know, and some of the controversies and conspiracies surrounding it in the years and decades since. This is only my second YouTube video, so I'm still learning as I'm filming these things. So let me guys know what you think of this video, if you like me filming this kind of content, and what other kind of content that you guys want to see me film. Like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and I don't really have a posting schedule set up yet, but I do want to post all the time. I do, like I said in my first video, want to film a lot of different kinds of content, so I never know what kind of content I'm going to end up filming next. So if you guys have an opinion on what kind of content you want me to film, let me know in the comments below, like I just said, and I hope you all have a good day.